Hi everyone, welcome to Aico TV, episode 36. I'm Alexandra Poporistic, Regional Specification Manager for West London, accompanied by
Lisa Sadler, a Marketing Executive here at Aico. Let's see what's coming up on this month's episode. In our first segment, we look back at our latest webinar. Earlier this year, our colleagues visited Hope House.
And finally, we visit our City and Guilds offering.
In our first segment, we look back at our latest webinar, which focused on the new structural versus environmental insight, which is now live on the HomeLINK portal for all users. We joined Chris, Jordan and Tom from HomeLINK, who discussed why room level data is vital for accurate reporting and analysis and what data can tell you about the risk of damp and mould.
Hello, welcome to our webinar, Structural versus Environmental, Analysing the Signature of Mould in Social Housing. So today we're going to talk a bit about one of our new insights that we've created and some of the history to that. I think it'll be really useful to people on this call, whether you're using our products or not. And we've had a huge number of people register to attend this, and even at bang on 10, we've already got 175 people, and it's increasing significantly. I think only, probably the next biggest webinar we've done was about 800, and we had Steve Wozniak and Tim Berners-Lee on that webinar. Unfortunately, today you've just got me and some data scientists in Bristol, but I think the information we're going to be able to give you will be really useful for you, and it should hopefully generate a lot of questions. On that point, if you do have questions, please ask throughout this webinar. There's going to be quite a good chunk of time at the end, around about 20 minutes to sort of go through those. So hopefully we can get through them. There's a lot of people. If we can't answer all the questions, we'll follow up with an email and potentially, if you're interested, we can always have a conversation with a local RSM. So just to go over the history of this insight, or what we're going to be talking about today. So clearly, in housing, the sort of underlying causes of damp and mold problems are quite often a sort of multitude of different factors. We talk about structural versus environmental, but what we really mean is on the structural side, looking at components that track sort of inherent characteristics related to the fabric of the room or home. And then on the environmental side, it's components that look at the conditions which the home is subjected to. So clearly there's a lot of different sort of underlying causes, and we've broken those two components into three separate areas, which you'll find useful. If you've obviously got our platform, this insight has gone live in the last week. But clearly, even if you don't, I think some of the ways that things that we're talking about today, if you're using sensors and looking at data within homes, you're going to be able to do a lot more of that. So hopefully it'll be useful. In terms of the history, we actually, when we first released the environment sensors just over a year ago, a year and a half ago, we could see that we started to sort of work with customers and try and understand how people were using it. It's obviously a key part of developing new technology. And what we found really interesting was across different landlords, the surveyors that were using this data, visiting properties, trying to figure out what the underlying cause was. Is it because the ventilation system's not sufficient for the property, or maybe it's not being used, or is it because there's a high level of heat loss? All these different things, these experts were looking at the property, looking at the data and trying to understand what kind of solutions might help really solve that underlying cause of the problem. And what we found was, obviously really useful having room level insights, so having sensors in different rooms. If you're already looking at IoT data or sensors in different rooms, you'll see that the stats are very, very different room to room. So that will give you a good understanding of where the kind of like root causes of issues are. And what these surveyors were doing was going beyond that, looking at the trends in the data, trend in humidity, is it spikes, is it persistently high, and then trying to understand if they should be looking for things like leaks, or is it advice they should be giving, or is it potentially a case of fuel poverty, or anything else. But what we knew at the time was it was very difficult to analyze, because if you've seen this kind of data, it's can look quite chaotic. And we had this idea that we would create this insight which would basically do a lot of that work for them, again, to sort of really help, which is what we're going to talk about today. This is our third generation of this insight. As far as we're aware, it's a classic thing to say, but this is the first time this level of this kind of insight has been created. I can't sort of find any other evidence of it around the world. So we're really excited to bring this to the sector. It's something we've been working on really hard for 9 months. And together, this kind of insight with the things like the resident app and the sort of intervention analysis, we really believe it's going to make a big difference in helping people trying to understand the underlying causes of issues, tracking whether interventions have worked or not, and then sort of having another go to sort of try and really get to the root cause of the problem. Clearly, anyone who's on this webinar that knows me will know that I'm not smart enough to come up with something like this myself. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Tom Weisner, one of our data scientists, and Jordan Toulson, our product manager, who both led the development and implementation of this, and they're over in Bristol.
Tom, we've been working really hard on this feature behind the scenes, and I'm really happy to say that it's live now on the portal for all of our customers to use. Let's tell them all about it. First of all, can you tell us about the fundamentals of mould? What do people need to understand about damp and mould that means that they'll get the most out of this feature?
So a basic understanding of mould. Mould is a term for a range of species of fungi that grow on damp surfaces and organic matter. Black mould in particular is a problem in buildings. It grows in environments where there's lots of humidity. It's a problem because it is associated with causing a range of health issues such as exacerbating asthma, skin allergens, causing headaches.
Absolutely, yeah. So what we've tried to do here is split our existing damp and mould insight, which is already well used within the industry, and break it apart into 6 individual components, haven't we?
Yeah, so there's 2 sides to the coin of identifying any risks associated with mould. Some are to do with structural issues with the property, and some are to do with the environment that the property is being subjected to. And what we find is that you've got to take into account the humidity levels, you've got to take into account the thermal situation of a room, and you also got to take into account the ventilation aspects.
Absolutely. So we've got 6 components in total, and 3 of those are structural, and 3 of those are to do with the environment that the building is finding itself in. So let's jump into the structural components. And the first one is typical surface humidity. What can you tell us about that, Tom?
So the sensors that we have, they record the humidity in the air, but mould doesn't grow in the air, it grows on the surfaces, on walls really. And so what we try to do with this component is assess what the humidity in the local area of the walls of the room will be, and we do that by considering the correlations between the temperature of the room as measured by the sensor with the temperatures of things external to the room. So that's the outdoor weather, is other rooms in the property. Using our heat loss thermal efficiency prediction with those correlations, we're able to calculate the temperature on the walls, and using that temperature we can then calculate the relative humidity, because relative humidity is actually affected by temperature. What we find is that outdoor temperatures are often colder than indoor temperatures, and so this has the effect of increasing the relative humidity on the walls where mould actually grows.
Fantastic. So what that means is that for people who have poorly performing insulation or double glazing that isn't at its best anymore, that means that they're going to have colder surfaces on the internal side of those walls, and that's going to cause the air at that surface to be cooler, which is going to increase the humidity. And at worst case scenario, you're going to get condensation starting to form in those spaces because the wall is cold enough for that condensation to form on.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Mould doesn't need condensation to occur, but when condensation does occur, that's a really significant issue. This component, it doesn't look at the average level of humidity that we find in the wall. What it does is attempt to find a baseline. So that's the level of humidity the walls rarely go below. And by doing that, we get a structural view of any issues that might be happening in the property, because if the baseline is high, it suggests that there is a continual inability perhaps for the room to ventilate, that the walls are thermally inefficient, so they're cold, or perhaps the room is a source for where humidity can congregate coming from other areas in the house, so there's a structural layout issue.
Absolutely. So that means that it's not just necessarily internal sources of humidity or moisture that are causing an issue here. It could be things like, well, it could be internal in terms of a mains leak, a pipe within the floor or within the wall leaking.
Any persistent water source will elevate the baseline humidity you get in that room, and that will be reflected in this component as well.
And that could even be guttering, couldn't it? That could be guttering outside that's not performing as it should be. Water is going into the wall, saturating the wall and coming through onto the internal side.
Yeah, that's penetrating damp.
Exactly that. So yeah, so that's our first component about structural side of things, understanding the baseline level of humidity And if a high score is achieved, it would indicate that the baseline is very high itself and never goes below that threshold where we think that it's reasonable to say that damp and mould won't be happy to start growing there because the humidity is below, say, 50-60%.
That's right. I think it's worth adding some qualification about what high means. So behind the scenes, all of our component scores are normally distributed. So if you score highly, that means compared to other properties, compared to other rooms across the UK, there is a significant issue.
Yeah, and that accesses Aico HomeLINK's really strong set of data that we have from across the 200,000 nearly connected devices across the UK. And that gives us a really strong platform to build all of this upon, doesn't it?
Yeah, and by continually normalising relative to the portfolio, we take into account seasonal variation as well.
Fantastic. Okay, so our second structural component is insufficient ventilation. What can you tell us about that?
So the ventilation capacity of a room is determined by things such as the mechanical ventilation, so extractor fans, also by things such as windows and doors being open. What we try to do with this component is see whether the ventilation capacity that is available is enough. And if we don't think it is, we'll score highly on that. And we do that by considering the ventilation rates of the absolute humidity in the room. So earlier we spoke about relative humidity, which is the concept most of us are familiar with. It's what you see if you go on BBC News and check out the humidity. But the absolute humidity is a measure of the true water content of the room. It's not affected by temperature. And so by seeing how quickly that water content is being released or dissipated from the room, we can get a measure of the ventilation rate.
Fantastic. So that means that we're looking for rooms that aren't able to get rid of the buildup of humidity that happens in general life. You know, myself and you are both breathing out humidity right now. We're both breathing out water moisture and water vapor, and that means that the humidity is building in this room.
It is.
If this room doesn't have the ability to get rid of that humidity, then it would score highly on this particular component, wouldn't it?
It would, yeah.
So that's really important to understand that this is about the structure of the building and the structure of an individual room, because it's understanding that the humidity doesn't have anywhere to go because the structural layout or the mechanical ventilation that has been put into a system isn't adequate enough to get rid of that buildup of humidity that does happen in every room in every property across the country. Component number 3 is heat dissipation. This is going to be all about the heat loss and therefore is very really related to the heat loss insight that we have as well, isn't it?
So the heat loss insight itself checks for the temperature in a room, how that is decaying, and from that we're able to infer a thermal efficiency, because if the decay is very fast, we see heat dropping at a quick rate, we know that there's a problem with the room in terms of its thermal efficiency. So heat dissipation here is a measure of that thermal inefficiency. If we think there's an issue, you're more likely to get cold spots forming on a wall, if there's any incorrectly installed insulation, for example, and that'll increase the local relative humidity, you get more chance of condensation, and again, feedback into the mold risk.
So that goes back to, it's very related to the typical surface humidity as well, isn't it? Because it means if you're seeing, for example, poorly performing insulation, that's when those cold spots are going to form, because we're seeing the temperature that's being put into the room being lost very quickly to the outside world. Those cold spots are going to be where that condensation forms, and as we said, damp loves condensation.
It does.
So that's the 3 structural components. Let's now look at the 3 environmental components. Tom, what can you tell us about the difference between the 2?
So whereas the structural components look at inherent attributes of the property, the environmental components look at the environment the building is being subjected to.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so within different rooms, for example, there is going to be a different environment. Kitchen environment is completely different to a living room environment.
And I think that's intuitive as well.
Absolutely. And it also leads very nicely onto the point that because our typical installation sees 3, if not 4 sensors spread throughout the house, we're able to provide all of these components, all of these individual sets of analysis for each individual room where a sensor is located. Rather than having a device in a central location that's taking swings and misses about what's going on at the far extremes of a building, we're able to understand in granular detail what's going on within the actual environment of a specific room. And that's really valuable when it comes to fighting these damp and mold issues, because you can walk into a property where you've had a complaint of mold, and you can go into a room and understand what it is you're looking for from the off. So it might be, for example, that you're suspicious of a high structural issue, and therefore you're looking for a leak as your first port of call. So it's really beneficial to surveyors on the ground looking at this data and then going into these properties to understand what's going on in real life.
Yeah, one quite interesting thing about the difference between the structural and environmental components is the structural ones tend to be fairly stable, as you probably would expect from something inherent about the building, whereas the environmental ones have a little bit of variability, but especially variability from room to room.
Absolutely, yeah. So the first environmental component is heating instability. What do you want to tell us about that?
So this component looks at the heating capacity that's in a room, and it checks to see whether it's being utilised fully. And the way that we do that is by considering the temperature profile indoors relative to the temperature profile outdoors. So when outside is colder or cooling, you'd expect to see that reflected indoors. And if it's not, there's evidence for artificial heating keeping the temperatures elevated in that room. In that case, we think that the heating's on, and so that we don't score this component.
Excellent, and that's really powerful as well, and especially when we look at the fact that cold home insight, for example, and this insight, if I'm correct, or only look at situations where the temperature drops below 18 degrees internally. So in the summer, this component isn't going to be an issue because typically, Britain, but British summers, you tend to have internal temperatures of higher than 18 degrees, whereas it's towards autumn and winter that you start to get below that.
Yeah, so this component is an exception, whereas the others are normally distributed. This one, if it's a warm temperature outside, you won't score on this, so it's different. In summer, you don't score very highly on this component. But the reason we use 18 degrees is because a lot of research has gone into this in like academia and by the government that say once you start going below 18 degrees, health risks start increasing, mortality rates start increasing. So the temperature of interest is 18 degrees. In this component, temperatures lower than 18, or as you get further and further below 18, we actually start increasing the impact of the scores if we think the heating's off at those temperatures because of the increased risk of harm to the tenant when the temperatures are cold. And I think this is an interesting precursor to a fuel poverty risk, because when it's very cold and you are not putting the heating on, you have to ask why.
Absolutely, yeah. So it just allows landlords to understand if there is a potential that a tenant is living within fuel poverty, and therefore be able to do anything that is available to them to help that resident in that situation.
That's right.
So I think that leads us nicely onto the second environmental component, which is underutilized ventilation.
So this is similar to the the underutilization of the heating, but here we're looking for the underutilization of the ventilation capacity of a room. So that's not using mechanical extraction fans if they're available, not opening windows, for example. And the way that we calculate this component is we consider how fast does a room ventilate, the absolute humidities that's there, and we consider lots of different time periods for that. And basically we get a range of different ventilation rates and we compare the differences between those. A narrow range suggests that the room is being used in a stable, consistent way. When there's a large range, you have to ask yourself what's going on at those times where it's taking much longer than at other times to ventilate. We know that the room can ventilate faster, but it's not being done so. So the ventilation capacity, therefore, is not being used.
Absolutely. So a good example might be, for example, if I'm cooking a Sunday roast, and the vegetables are on the hob, and one Sunday I remember to turn the extractor on. Excellent, brownie points for me. Got the extractor on, any humidity that's being released from those boiling vegetables is immediately being taken away from the room. Mm-hmm. If the following Sunday I missed that and I forget to turn the extractor on, you're going to see a buildup of humidity that would otherwise have been dissipated. And because of the data collected last Sunday showing that humidity can be dissipated at a decent rate, this component would score more highly in that scenario where I've forgotten to turn the extractor on, because we're seeing that humidity stick around a lot longer. That's
absolutely it. I think talking about boiling vegetables and releasing humidity is a good segue to move on to our third component.
Absolutely, yeah. So humidity surges is our third and final environmental component. And as Tom said, a really good example of this might be if I'm boiling vegetables every single day on the hob, you're going to see a very regular and significant increase in the humidity every day at the same time. And that might impact on this score.
Yeah, so what we do is we consider the times of day when these dramatic rises of absolute humidity are happening, rises that you couldn't explain due to natural variation of the levels. We then consider how frequently they occur during the times of day that are most common. And so based on that frequency measure, we can say that it's very likely due to be something that is systematic based on the activity.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so it's really powerful in understanding how the resident is using their home and what impact they're having on the environment within it. And that's where the HomeLINK app comes into things, because the HomeLINK app is really good for giving information to the tenant, the person that's living within that home, to help them understand when and how the humidity is increasing, which may result in an increased risk of damp and mould, and just give them some recommendations as to what they might be able to do differently. So, for example, putting lids on pots and pans is a very cliche, typical example of doing exactly that.
Yeah, there's information on the resident app available about both or all of the ventilation, humidity, and temperature aspects of keeping a house in a good condition.
Absolutely that. So that is our new feature, structural versus environmental. If you want to see this now, it is live on your portal. If you just log on and then navigate to a property of interest, and then choose the environment dashboard, and then expand upon damp and mould risk components, you will be able to see the SVE for that property on your very own screens. Back to the studio.
Thank you to everyone who joined us at this webinar. If you want any more information, check out the links below. Earlier this year, our colleagues visited Hope House to do some maintenance work and volunteering. We also sat down to speak with some of the representatives from Hope House.
At Hope House, we provide respite for children with complex care needs, but our overall mission is that nobody should face the death of a child alone, and to make that happen, that involves a huge staff team and volunteers, and whether it's volunteers that are helping in care, gardening, Aico, as we've got here today, as a corporate volunteer, bringing in money, donating their time today. It's all of us together that make that mission happen.
So it was great for me and some colleagues to visit Hope House recently. Hope House is actually one of the oldest charities we've been working with. Hope House, we do lots with them throughout the year, so it's great to visit. It's a great local charity, and we basically went to carry out some maintenance work to their playground. We were painting fences, and we also managed to varnish some benches for them. Doing this sort of work is great because it means that if we're doing it, then they don't have to pay contractors to come in, which saves them time and money.
We've got Aico here today, and we know that Aico are really big supporters of Hope House. It's absolutely fantastic, the money that they raise for us, their support, but also lovely to invite them to the hospice today and have them outside in the grounds. They're working with the maintenance team, helping with some of the gardening and painting, and it's really good to be able to meet the team and see what they do at work. So really, really pleased to have them today. Really, without volunteers, kind of like the hospice probably wouldn't function as it does, so a really valuable asset to have volunteers here.
The support Aico offers is so important because it enables organisations like Hope House to not have to get subcontractors in to carry out work, and then on the back of that, the cost saving then goes back into the most important thing, which is helping families at a really, really difficult time.
I like bringing care to the families and respite for obviously the children's families, being there for the children in the day to give them good things to do. Take them swimming, take them out to the fairy garden for walks. We have lots of volunteers that come and help us at the hospice, and without these volunteers it would be very hard going for a charity that I work for.
Thank you to Hope House for having us, and next we're going to look at HomeLINK's new video.
Take a look up. Chances are Aico HomeLINK are already keeping your property safe. Aico is the UK's largest smart home technology provider in social housing. But with HomeLINK, we have so much more than just fire and carbon monoxide alarms. Our market-leading, award-winning ecosystem not only keeps you and your property safe, but empowers you to take on challenges like net zero with confidence. The hardware is easy to install and feeds directly to both the landlord portal software and residential apps seamlessly. Our platform puts everything at your fingertips, connecting you to fire and carbon monoxide alarms with an environmental sensor, measuring humidity, temperature, and carbon dioxide. And because we measure individual rooms rather than a central location, our insights can predict the risk of mould, indoor air pollution, fuel poverty, and much more, with absolute precision. The right information to the right people at the right time. Empowering residents to take the first step, introducing preventative measures leading to huge time and cost savings. HomeLINK is proven. HomeLINK is part of Aico, the European market leader in home life safety. Our 30-year heritage can be reliable. HomeLINK is innovative. You can be assured of world-leading innovation and an ever-evolving service designed to fit the need of a modern landlord and resident. Our first-to-market, class-defining products are creating healthier homes for the future that will become even more connected as our growing ecosystem expands. HomeLINK is trusted. From design to manufacture, we are responsible for our entire supply chain. This means that quality can be guaranteed and third-party products with their associated issues can be avoided. Our products are individually and rigorously tested, resulting in near zero failures. Unlike other alternatives, our platform was designed from the ground up with security in mind. We keep your data safe and secure. And you already know, we've got our expert regional specification managers across the UK to support you. So, when you partner with us, you're not just buying a product off the shelf, you're gaining a partner that will stand by you. So the next time you look up, remember that Aico and HomeLINK are here to protect you, your residents, and your future investments.
Earlier this year, we released our City and Guilds Assured course, Domestic Fire and CO Alarm Systems. In November, we visited one of these sessions to see how our installers got on.
Today we are delivering our City and Guilds Assured programme. It's the next iteration of our training on the success of our expert installer. We wanted to take that to the next level. So this entire day's course is City and Guild Assured and hopefully providing a lot more competence in both the electrical and the fire industry. So throughout the day it's a mixture of practical sessions as well as theory sessions. So we cover standards and regulations related to both fire, electrical and carbon monoxide, but then we move on to some of the technologies within our products and in general within the industry and the way that the technology is pushing the industry further forward with new technologies, and we can hopefully give plenty of opportunity for questions and answers throughout that as well.
The most enjoyable part of the course for me so far has been the lecturer. He's been very good at getting the knowledge across. The power slides have been brilliant and the practicals have been good so far. The knowledge and understanding I've got from today is basically how to site the alarms and how to plan the alarms in a design process. Maybe things I wouldn't have thought of before, I certainly do now.
It's always fun to do a practical part, of course. It was really interesting to take the different scenarios and be able to refer back to the table and mark on the diagram where the alarm should go. It's always interesting to hear different people's decisions as to why they put things in different places.
Learning about the Aico product's been interesting, to find out all the different kinds of alarms, how they function, the testing, the inspection, what all the different features of the alarms are. That's all been quite good today. And how it all fits together with domestic smoke and heat alarms and CO alarms and stuff has been, you know, how you can piece the Aico product to the standard and stuff has been really good.
We don't charge a fee for our City and Guilds Assured course because creating safer communities is a core value here at Aico. And one of the ways we do that is by raising standards through knowledge, training and education. Similar courses can cost hundreds of pounds. We believe that our course offers great value and offers additional insights in terms of product applications and technology that other courses simply can't match. We also provide all the learning materials required on the day, and the learner's free to take those home with them at the end.
I would recommend this course to other installers. I think it gave me a better insight into what we should be doing. I realised that there's a few jobs that maybe we should have installed more than we did, and just sort of a better knowledge on the regulations and all the recommendations and changes in things as well. I think everybody that installs sort of anything domestic, electrical wise, should look at doing this course.
I feel this course has been a great overview of fire alarm installation and design, and I would definitely recommend that it is something that people look at as to whether they're able to come and do it.
Thank you to all our installers who have completed our City and Guilds course so far this year, and some winter fire safety tips from our team.
Merry Christmas! The festive period can be full of fire hazards, so a couple of quick tips. Don't leave flames unattended and try not to overload plug sockets.
Hi, I'm Jane, Community Liaison at Aico. December's been a really busy month for us. Lots of festive activities going on. We have taken part in the Oswestry Christmas Parade. So we had a float along with lots of other businesses and community groups all parading through Oswestry, raising lots of money. We've had colleagues taking part in the Oswestry Santa Run. So that was raising money for Ling and Davis Cancer Fund. We've had our Christmas Jumper Day, raising money for Save the Children. And we've had children here from local primary schools using our auditorium to watch a Christmas film. We also have the Oswestry Food Bank here, and they are using our facilities to pack Christmas hampers, which will be delivered out to families all across the whole of our region. Yeah, it's been really, really good fun. We're really happy to support our local community, and we're looking forward to 2023, where we will be looking to support lots of local organisations, and our charity focus will be in support of children and young people.
Thank you for joining us today, and a special thank you to all our guests. Don't forget to subscribe on our social media platforms, which are
Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook and TikTok. Thank you.